An ordinary hero. How a cup of tea changed everything. I never thought that my life, ordinary and routine, could turn into something exciting. My daily schedule was no different from millions of other people. Waking up at 7 a.m., coffee from a machine, work in the office until 5, followed by a quick dinner and TV at home. Every day felt like the one before. On weekends, I occasionally met up with friends, but most of the time, I stayed home with my cat, Harry. He was the only one who shared those calm, even slightly dull days with me. Everything changed one Friday evening. I was heading home from work when I noticed my neighbor, Mr. Howard. He was standing near the door to his apartment, visibly nervous. I stopped to ask if everything was okay. "Oh, I've lost my keys," he sighed. "The locksmith will only come in 2 hours and I've left everything inside." It was cold and Mr. Howard looked exhausted. I offered him to come into my place while he waited. He hesitated a bit but agreed. We spent a little over an hour together, talking about the weather, old movies, and his children who live far away. He thanked me for the hospitality and said it was very nice to have such a kind neighbor. The next morning, I received a message from another neighbor, Jason from the third floor. He'd heard from Mr. Howard about my help and asked if I could assist him in moving a new couch. It was no big deal, so I agreed. However, this was just the beginning. A few days later, Mrs. Rogers, an elderly woman living next door, approached me. She asked if I could take a look at her old kettle that had stopped working. I wasn't much of a handyman, but I managed to find the problem and fix it. She was so grateful that she brought me a homemade pie. A week later, I got another request: help setting up the internet. Over time, I began to feel like a kind of help center for my neighbors. Someone needed advice, others needed help with small tasks. At first, it annoyed me a bit. I valued my peace and quiet, but gradually I realized that these small actions gave me satisfaction. I started to communicate more with people, learn their stories, and feel that I was doing something meaningful. One day, Brian, a young guy who lived across the street, came to me. He was in despair because his dog had gone missing. Together, we printed flyers, walked around the neighborhood, and even made a post on social media. 3 days later, the dog was found, spotted in a nearby park. Brian was thrilled, and for the first time in a long while, I felt proud of what I had done. Soon, I started noticing how lonely many of my neighbors were. Mr. Howard, for instance, had no close friends, and his children rarely visited. Mrs. Rogers had lost her husband a few years ago, and her days passed in silence. Even young families like Brian and his wife seemed disconnected from those around them. I decided to try to change that. We organized our first neighborhood picnic in the local park. At first, the idea seemed silly to me. Who would come to such an event? But I was amazed when almost all the residents of our building showed up. We lit up the grill, shared food, and told stories. After that evening, we created a group chat where everyone could share news and plan meetups. But the real challenge came one night. Mrs. Rogers called me at about 3 in the morning. She had heard strange noises in the hallway and was scared. I stepped out of my apartment and saw a man in dark clothing trying to break into one of the apartments. I don't know where I found the courage, but I yelled, "I've already called the police!" It was a lie. I didn't even have my phone with me. But the intruder got scared and ran off. The police arrived a few minutes later. It turned out that the man was responsible for a series of burglaries in our area. My neighbors called me a hero, though I felt like just a lucky guy. But after this incident, I realized I had become an important part of our little community. Day by day, life in our building began to change. People started to communicate more, help each other, and even spend more time together. I noticed how Mr. Howard began to smile more often, and Brian and his wife spent more time outdoors with their dog. We organized several charity events to help those in need, and our building became known in the neighborhood as an example of a true community. Later, bigger changes began. Together, we wrote a petition to the city council to set up a children's playground on a vacant lot nearby. Previously, this area was used as a dump, but thanks to our initiative, it turned into a park with benches, swings, and a small stage for local events. This became our collective achievement, and I was proud to be part of it. The idea of the park gave new momentum to our community. We started organizing outdoor movie nights, even inviting neighbors from nearby buildings. One day we held a neighborhood cleanup day, and even children joined in, picking up trash and planting flowers. It seemed like the entire area had come to life. giving everyone a sense of unity. Time passed, and our community grew even closer. For New Year's, we organized a festive market right in the courtyard of our building. Kids sold handmade decorations, and adults brought homemade pastries. We even invited a local musician who created a wonderful atmosphere. That evening remained in the memory of everyone who was there. I also began helping young people looking for their place in life. One such example was Max, a teenager from our building. He was passionate about programming but didn't know how to develop his skills. I connected him with a friend of mine who worked in IT. 6 months later, Max landed his first job and was endlessly grateful for the support. We also started a tradition of celebrating every resident's birthday. This was my idea and everyone supported it. Every month we threw a party for those who had birthdays. It became a wonderful opportunity to gather together and for the birthday people to feel cared for and appreciated. It was especially touching to see how happy the kids were receiving their small gifts. Another significant achievement was setting up a library on the first floor of our building. I collected old books that neighbors no longer read and organized an open book corner. This place became popular among both children and adults. People not only borrowed books, but also started leaving their own. Over time, the library even had magazines and board games. Sometimes I think about how my life would have turned out if I hadn't invited Mr. Howard in for tea that cold evening. Perhaps I would have continued living in my own world, avoiding contact with people. But now I know that even the smallest act of kindness can change not only the lives of others, but also your own. My life has become rich and vibrant. Instead of silence and loneliness, I gain true friends and the feeling that my presence matters. And most importantly, I realize that each of us can be a hero, not always in a loud dramatic sense, but in everyday acts that make the world a better place. Now every day of mine is full of events. I help organize celebrations, do small repairs, and simply listen when someone needs support. And it gives me more joy than I could have imagined, because true happiness lies in the simple things we do for others. Later, I even decided to start a small blog where I shared my stories about our community. It was unexpected, but readers from different parts of the city started writing to me, thanking me for the inspiration, and even offering their ideas for improving neighborhoods. One day I received a letter from a young man who confessed that after reading my stories, he began helping his neighbors, and for the first time in a long while felt needed. My life has become rich and vibrant. Instead of silence and loneliness, I gain true friends and the feeling that my presence matters. And most importantly, I realize that each of us can be a hero, not always in a loud, dramatic sense, but in everyday acts that make the world a better place. Now, every day of mine is full of events. I help organize celebrations, do small repairs, and simply listen when someone needs support. And it gives me more joy than I could have imagined, because true happiness lies in the simple things we do for others. Later, I even decided to start a small blog where I shared my stories about our community. It was unexpected, but readers from different parts of the city started writing to me, thanking me for the inspiration and even offering their ideas for improving neighborhoods. One day, I received a letter from a young man who confessed that after reading my stories, he began helping his neighbors, and for the first time in a long while, felt needed. One day, I received an unexpected call. It was the local newspaper wanting to write an article about our community. A journalist came, spent a day with us, talked to the neighbors, and photographed our courtyard. A week later, the article appeared in print. They called me the person who unites, and it was incredibly gratifying. My story doesn't end here. It continues every day when I step outside and see the smiles of people who have become a real family to me. I've come to believe that each of us can be a hero. You don't need superpowers or grand gestures to do so. You just need to open your heart and start acting, even with small steps.